Hello and welcome to the ECA Research Podcast. I'm James Cook, ECA Director of Research Innovation, and today I'm joined by Penny Travlou. Penny is Senior Lecturer in Cultural Geography and Theory at the Edinburgh School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture. Penny's research is interdisciplinary, focusing on social justice, the commons, collaborative practices, emerging networks, feminist methodologies, critical landscape theory, epistemologies of the South, and ethnography. Her ethnographic research looks at collaborative practices in emerging networks such as of art organisations, collaborative economy initiatives, translocal migrants and activists. Today we're going to be talking about decolonising the city. So, Penny, I suppose at the centre of your broader project, which we're going to unpack a little bit more of later, there was a sort of major festival that you put on. I wonder if you could maybe start by just talking us through how you framed that and what went on in the festival.
Yes, for sure. So last May, for 3 days, we organised a festival called I Have a Dream, Second Generation United. That was within the context of the Black History Month in Greece. So the festival was the first of its kind, to put it this way, bringing together diverse communities and venues, 6 venues, disseminating the work of different collectives of African descent to a wider audience and allow them unprecedented access to the public realm. So that was actually the aim of the festival. And also this allows us in return unique access to operational structures, building toward more partnerships for the future and to continue working with communities of African heritage. Now, the festival, as said, was within 6 different venues, different types of galleries, music, concert hall, etc. And there were also different activities and events, from an exhibition by contemporary artists of African heritage who live and work in Athens, film screenings on Black feminism and its everyday realities in Athens, a panel discussion on Pan-Africanism experiences of citizenship, Blackface and Black representation in the arts and culture in Greece. Specifically, that was ended in a podcast itself, pop-up African kitchens, children workshops with books, with stories related from the African past and heritage, and a live concert with African contemporary hip-hop bands from Athens and across Greece.
Great. And can you give us a bit of an introduction to the broader project, Decolonising the City? Maybe talk us through some of the key aims, the methodology that you used, which I know is quite an experimental one, as well as some of the key concepts in terms of the model of co-developing the festival.
I would really like to start with my colleagues, or otherwise my collaborators in Decolonising the City, and then explain what Decolonising the City is about. So this project is an initiative between myself and Dr. Antonis Vradis, a lecturer in sustainable development at the School of Geography and Sustainable Development in the University of St. Andrews. And specifically, Antonis is a geographer with an urban focus, a migration inclination and a political urge to make sense of our turbulent times. That's how he describes his work. We collaborate as well with Dr. Anna Papoutsi, a Leverhulme Early Career Fellow at the School of Social Policy, Sociology and Criminology in the University of Birmingham. Anna is with us as an interdisciplinary scholar working at the intersection of border studies, migration, urban studies, and social policy. So, as I mentioned, more than 2 years ago, we came together and we funded the Decolonising the City. And we got funding from Urban Studies Foundation and the Independent Social Research Foundation. And that was for a year with an extension because it has been extended for almost 2 years. That's the first stage of the project. So I would say that the key aim of the project is to generate a participatory arts-based methodological toolkit, co-designed with, in this case, migrant communities, to help us explore how migrants practice urban citizenship. I understand that there are here quite a lot of concepts and keywords, which I hope that in this podcast I can explain in more detail. First of all, when we say the city, we mean Athens. So the project is located in Athens, and when we talk about migrant communities, we again refer to migrant communities of African heritage. Maybe outside Greece, I don't know, maybe people do not know, but Athens at present is a multicultural city through different stages of migration, and most recently the 2015 refugee crisis. So quite a lot of people have moved and come to live in Athens, although I would say the different African communities have been established throughout decades. Some more recently from sub-Saharan Africa, but others have been for very many decades. So we're now talking about first generation, but also second and third generation of migrants from African heritage, including East, West, and North Africa mostly. Thinking also about when I'm saying participatory arts-based methods, I would suggest first to a little bit unpack what we mean by that, but also what is the background of how we work in this project. And I would say that our methodology or research framework stems from theoretical trajectories from the epistemologies of the South. This may not be very known widely, but basically we're talking mostly from the global South and predominantly from Latin America, having in mind and how basically we can consider an epistemology that merges academic research with activism, but also creative practices. And within that, what kind of methods that could be more inclusive, more participatory, and more community-based. And quite often, the answer to all these come back into creativity. So this is where arts-based methods come in. And thinking with participatory action research, where there is an extra element here, which is again the arts, how creative processes can be used throughout a project together with the communities, but also from the academic perspective. And it is also breaking down the hierarchies. The idea is then that in this particular kind of research framework, you are co-produce, co-create, co-think. So it's all the different processes from thinking together down to create together.
So that the arts-based research is a way of sort of helping to co-create and bring the communities on board as part of that process rather than breaking down those hierarchies to an extent.
The other thing is that through this we use an acronym which is called REFEDECOM, which can be translated like reciprocity, that this research is based on reciprocity, that you give something from the academic perspective and from the research, but also you take back something in relation to what the communities you work with are engaging with. So it's quite horizontal and quite open and transparent, the different stages of the research. Then we're using feminist theory and methodology, particularly in relation to care, that we do research with care with the communities, for the communities. And I'll explain what we mean by communities here. And thirdly is the decolonial, which is one of the keywords also of the project itself, which I hope through your questions, James, we can unpack this as well. So decolonial, I mean, in the sense that we shy away from extractivist academic knowledge production that merely gathers local knowledge and projects upon its Western epistemological understandings. So how can we see, in all the terms, research that is not extractivist, meaning that you go somewhere for a number of months, years, you take the knowledge, you bring it somewhere else, and you produce material that can be only shared within your academic community. So it's a matter of thinking how you can go beyond, how the project can look on outreach impact, and how those involved beyond your academic partners can benefit from this type of research. So decoloniality in this sense refers specifically on thinking against extractivist academic knowledge production. And finally, it's the idea of community-driven, that what we do in all the stages are community-driven, even in cases which also we can talk about of conflict, because not everything can go smoothly. You can encounter conflict because it's a matter of trust. And this is also comes reciprocity and transparency, that in this kind of projects, which are quite often fragile for various reasons, there can be also issues of how can you build trust bonds. And when you are thinking with community in mind, this gives you more possibilities of finding ways to go beyond those possible conflicts or find ways to engage creatively with the outcome of a conflict. Also, what I would like to say here, because this project has been for us, for myself, Antonis and Anna, also a kind of an experiment in methodologies and how we work as a collective, the three of us, but also how we work with others, and what kind of methodology we use. I said about these concepts and epistemologies of the South, but also we look on what it is to work together in those different stages, how to work with others, how to work within the team, the core team, the academic team, and how to exchange possibilities of doing things together.
Okay, so Refait de Com, which I think stands for Reciprocal, Feminist, Decolonial and Community-Driven. That's quite a complex set of values for a research and impact framework, but it sounds like a really collaborative way of working, experimenting with different ways of exchanging ideas and possibilities, both with each other and also, of course, with the communities that are involved with the project.
Yes, definitely. Yes, we work with this concept of collabor, following or inspired by the Argentinian anthropologist Marisol de la Cadena, who has, let's say, coined, in a sense, the term co-laboring or co-labor ethnography. So still we have some principles stemming out from ethnographic fieldwork practice, but at the same time looking on co-labor. This means that when we talk about collaboration, quite often there is still hierarchies. It's different when we talk about teamwork than collaboration. There are different ways of breaking down these hierarchies as much as possible. So co-labor means that you work together. Through this endeavor, something is going to be created along the way. In this case of this project, that I'll give you more details later, it's been a festival and it's going to be again most likely a festival. So how do you work the processes from thinking about what we can do together? How can we assist the communities that they are wishing to create this event, down to how you organizing it, disseminating it, and the post-production, post-evaluation of that outcome. And obviously having in mind back in positionality, where you come from, who you are. In the case of us, three, and this is another interesting point to mention here, is that relates to our positionality as researchers as well, is that all three of us were Greeks in, let's say, our first citizenship, to put it this way. Maybe some of us, we have a double citizenship, but let's say we are all Greeks working as academics in the UK and having basically quite often to deal with issues of coloniality also within our own ways of being here as academics, and particularly when you're a junior academic, no matter all the other type of obstacles you may encounter, one of the things, it has to do with where you come from, and this whiteness and how much white within the whiteness can be seen or not be seen. So we were discussing quite a lot about our own position within the academic context here and moving back to our country and what we can do with other communities that from the other side that have been, let's say, considered as foreigners, migrants, of course, etc., and how they see us as, again, academics, so another hierarchical issue, and whites, another issue. So there's quite a lot of complexity, but this is where we started from.
And can you tell us a little bit about the context for this project in Athens? I suppose the particular urgency of doing this kind of urban citizenship project at this precise moment in time. What were the kinds of conversations you were having with your colleagues?
Yeah. Andonis, before this project, he was involved in a major project about crisis escapes in Athens. The name was about crisis escapes and was related about the far right. In Athens, Golden Dawn was known, and where you can locate this within the city and how you can map the city accordingly to what was going on politically wise from that perspective, from the far right, and what was this, how was manifested in the city. So obviously one thing when you look at it is definitely color, and you realize that one community that is definitely encountering major issues related to that is the communities of African heritage. They're more visible in that sense because of the color. Sorry to say skin color. I'm using really like this very colloquial way of describing it. Whereas as this project is shown, they're lacking all the type of visibility in the city. On the one hand, they're very visible because of that, but on the other hand, are less visible on other sense. So we're talking about how could these communities can claim citizenship, urban citizenship within the city of Athens, and how that could be much more visible. These were questions that we got to think about when we were writing the funding proposals, why we wanted to do that and why now. Talking with Anna and Antonis and with having my own knowledge from the African communities a little bit earlier on, because from 2015 to 2000, let's say 18 or 17, let's say the first 2 years of the high point of the refugee crisis, I was also involved in collective kitchens. So I was running with other people, including migrants, an African collective kitchen, One Love Kitchen. So that became an activist project, but at the same time, I was feeding up material, ethnographic material for my own research. So, and I had written published work on the making of this kind of kitchen and what it means and how you bring people together through cooking. But it's not just cooking, it's how you mobilize people to become visible in the city. In that case, through culinary practices, which is again, you can think from an artistic perspective as well. And we recognize this lacking of visibility. And although there is a kind of growing number of small festivals of African artists coming together, still there's very limited and for a particular audience, or they're lacking of funding. Or in the case of funding, one of the things that happens, and we also notice that, is co-optation, that you have major private art institutions and foundations, private mostly, in Greece, coming and on the one hand offering, let's say, financial support, limited, but at the same time taking a huge amount of cultural capital and social capital from these communities. So it is quite uneven. So all these were questions that they were brought on the table for us to think how we can start developing this project and why to consider thinking about decolonizing the city.
Yes, I think it would be really valuable to dig into the decolonising focus of the project a little more. You've talked a bit already about the context specifically in Athens, and you and your colleagues' previous work in far-right movements, the visibility or invisibility of specific communities, particularly migrant communities. And of course your own positionality in the Greek context of belonging in some ways, through your own engagement with activism in these communities, and also your Greek citizenship, as well as being separate or other in other ways too. I imagine that must all be complicated by the huge changes that Athens, and indeed Greece as a country, has experienced, particularly in the last, more than a decade of consecutive crises, from the debt crisis to migrant reception, and then, of course, COVID-19 as well. I wonder if you could speak a little more on, I suppose it is a two-pronged question here, really. Firstly, the specific focus on Athens, its significance as a city, and what decolonisation means to you in the context of a country like Greece. And then secondly, the extent to which you think this methodology that you've described might work as a model in other spaces.
Yes, methodologically speaking, for sure. But I cannot really tell or by certainty that we can talk about decolonizing the city in other cities. Depends on the context. But for example, the reason we thought, apart from what I mentioned already about Athens, to focus on Athens, is that the city itself, it's at Europe's periphery and center. So it is the birthplace of civilization in European imaginaries, to put it this way. And at the same time, geographically speaking, is on the continent's edge, and culturally and politically. And I would say that, and I'm sorry I'm making a parenthesis, but it is related with the project that right now, it is in a couple of months, is this European Song Contest, Eurovision. And the song that has been chosen to represent Greece will be sung by a Greek Sudanese singer who basically collaborates with some of our members in this project. And it has been this debate within the Greek context whether this is something related with Europe or something outside. It's more Balkan-oriented. So there is a question still in Greece. And obviously, we're talking Athens as a capital, around where we are positioned ourselves, what are we, and always in reference to Europe. And there is the colonization of the ideal due to this idea of the birthplace of civilization. But then it's different layers of colonization within the country. Particularly, we're talking also about migrants moving and living and making home the city. So what kind of layers are we talking about coloniality, and then how you could decolonize your community within that city? And all this brings interesting ways of discussing decolonization from that perspective. So I could not say that this is exactly the same everywhere. I could say that the methods themselves, or the methodology we're using, yes, I could consider seeing it in reference to here, for instance. And I know that they've been used. Participatory arts-based research is also being used in context in the UK with regards to minoritized communities of Black and African descent, and not only. So yes, from that perspective.
Yeah, I suppose I was wondering what you saw as the main problem that your work was addressing. I suppose we've talked around that a little bit in terms of the way that the methodology is designed to combat certain things, but maybe you could unpack a little bit more in terms of that sort of main focus of the problem that you want to solve.
The answer could be twofold, or in two levels. The one is in relation to the outcome of the project, which is a festival that was last year in May, a 3-day festival, I Have a Dream, a Second Generation United. That was the name, and the name was picked up by the group, the community, or the organization we work with, ANASA, which is a cultural center for the arts and culture of African communities in Athens. They wanted to celebrate the Black History Month in Greece, which in this case is May, through this particular festival, and focusing specifically on the second generation and kind of what are the issues that the second generation youth are encountering, let alone that even the director of ANASA, of that art organization, still doesn't have a Greek citizenship. He's in his late 30s and still he's not. So these are issues very much in the heart of this community that creates kind of barriers for them to be visible. So when I'm saying visibility and invisibility, that's what I'm saying. I'm trying to say visibility in reference to who they are and how they are in space, color-wise. But then in regards to citizenship, they are invisible and their issues. So their communities are not be seen as such, or only in moments of, let's say, of big successes, like we have a major athlete, like a basketball player, who has basically, through him and through basically winning the NBA, the question of citizenship came back into the African communities, from the state. So we're talking about these moments of visibility, which are very specific and not for the everydayness of these communities. So going back, I would say that the problem, if we can say so, of organizing this festival, it was, first of all, was super ambitious. We didn't understand that from the very beginning, how ambitious this project would be in reference to organizing a festival that wanted to leave a legacy. And the legacy, not from the academic perspective, but the community wanted to leave a legacy in the city, that this will be remembered. That will be the start of many more festivals. I have a dream that will follow up. Issues were meant in relation to organization. How do you build trust? There were moments that this trust were kind of broke down connections rather than bringing them together. So we had to find ways to work and to translate, because also another thing is, how do you translate academic research and your positionality and who you are with people or you work with who are outside the academic context, and they may have a particular prejudice towards and suspicion towards of what you are trying to gain out of it. What exactly are you trying to do with this collaboration, to put it this way? So we needed to be as transparent as possible to ensure that we can be able to maintain this collaboration further to the end product, which was the festival.
Did you find there that there was a kind of meeting point in coming from creative backgrounds? Was that a kind of way to get over that boundary and find a place of commonality?
Yeah, I think the part that I was speaking to them was when we were talking about, more art-related matters. We try not to use or to say, okay, here we are, let's go down into doing this and that using, academic language, etc. Where actually the conflict may be was in terms of where we were trying to share ideas that we thought that they were shared across, but we didn't share at the end. And we are now working on a paper about lessons be learned through this, what we can share with our colleagues, our academic colleagues, in reference, how do you basically overcome these things? Thinking about, race and ethnicity is one thing, but what we realize, one thing that needs mostly to be encouraged is intersectionality, that it's not just about ethnicity and race, that it is about class and it's about gender. And that doesn't mean that you share these values across, So these were things that needed to be more into consideration from the very beginning. So this kind of misunderstandings needed to be, next time, let's say, to consider all the strategies or tactics to work through.
Great, thank you. Definitely those themes of trust building, engaging with communities to develop those relationships come through really strongly in this project. But I was wondering if you could expand a little bit about some of the main issues or problems that you and your colleagues have identified through doing the work, either things that surprised you or perhaps lessons learnt from which future similar projects might benefit.
I would say, actually, instead of problems, to think about what can we learn from this project. And one of the key words we use is unlearning, learn to unlearn. What we already know as academics, maybe as Greek citizens, and what we've encountered through this project to give us new understandings about our city, but also in an academic context. So I would say that first, we thought we knew our city quite well. And of course, to some extent, in a sense, we do. As I mentioned, we are all three academics, but Greeks, working in the UK. And one thing we realized is that we knew very little about the everydayness of the African diaspora communities in our city and even in actually neighborhoods that we are part of, like Kypseli, which is a very central neighborhood. One of us, Anna, is a resident there, but still it was an issue of not, as mentioned before, the visibility and invisibility of these communities. And the working with our partners in this project gave us access to understanding and having a first-hand experience of what is happening around our neighborhoods in reference to these communities who are our fellow citizens. We use citizens, although not all of them are recognized officially through formal roots of citizenship. Second, we set off with a broad but fairly established sense of what it means to be decolonial in our praxis. A rough but guided sense of what it means to try and consciously dismantle the institutions, logics, and processes that still cast, let's say, the colonial spell over the ways in which we coexist in cities today. So, in a sense, to do this in a place like Athens led us to all sorts of enticing contradictions. Maybe I mentioned briefly, but the kind of fertile grey zones and zones of ambiguity where the decolonial notion is tested to the limit. And again, is the big question, is Greece a colonizing force? Because usually we think in relation to empires that they colonize or the lands. So it's a matter what happens within a country in that context itself. And thirdly, we had expected that our final output, meaning the festival, which was very ambitious, could work out, let's say, fairly, unambiguously, and at least in terms of the decisions that this kind of event entails, like, for example, the sponsors and the venues, the alliances, and the organizing principles that make it happen.
So in terms of unlearning then, there's lots of complexities and contradictions here around representation, visibility, decolonialisation, discrimination. Did you and your colleagues on the whole manage to negotiate all of these and come through the other side of the project still feeling as though you were allies?
So we have managed, I think, to navigate these contradictions quite well, and we're delighted to say in a collective and collegial spirit that has strengthened our resolve and not weakened it. And that's why we're here thinking about continuing in this field of research using participatory arts-based methods, but also organizing another festival.
Great, thank you. I suppose your work, very clearly has real-world applications in that there was a festival that you put on that would not otherwise have happened. But I suppose I was wondering, what impact have you seen that have on the community? Has that changed people's lives? Do you think it has helped to make people more visible within the city and I suppose more broadly within Greece?
Okay, festival on its own, particularly a festival which is, the least I can say, self-organized and quite autonomous, cannot make a change in a day or in a year, but you can see in a longer term process that can have, because what happened within the festival is a commitment by the communities that they will continue the discussions around active citizenship. And as far as we are aware, they have regular meetings with various different groups of different migrant communities from African heritage, but not only. They are started actually talking more directly with the organizations or lobbyists from the Albanian migrant communities, from the Afghani communities. So they're trying to create a strong lobby for claiming citizenship for second generation. And as mentioned, now we're talking about third generation. We have younger children that is actually kids of the second generation parents.
So there's a real legacy then from the work that you've done so far, not just from the events themselves, but also in terms of the community organising that's ongoing from the co-development aspect of the project.
In that sense, yes, I could see that there is a legacy here, and also seeing that through the promotion that happened for the festival, it brought very different groups of people coming, and beyond, if it was actually a festival or an exhibition, it would have been the very particular kind of audience coming from the arts. But in this case, it was much broader, bringing people from the neighborhoods themselves. The other thing that happened is that due to this festival, other groups came to us and wanted to collaborate, like in this case, what we're planning to do as a forthcoming festival in June 2024 with another collective of artists of African heritage, basically first generation. And we wouldn't say first generation as much as migrants and refugees and without papers, some of them, or sans-papiers as they're known too. Yeah, so we could say that there has been a legacy and quite impactful of that festival.
Brilliant. I suppose my final question then is, what's next? What's next for the project?
What's next for the project? I would say two things have happened. One, which is definitely back into the academic context, and one that comes back in the communities. The first one is that this project makes us quite stronger as a collective, or as working together, the three of us, and building trust bonds between the three of us, because this project was the first one working collaboratively together. We never worked before in a project together, so it was also for us quite new. It's a novice experience and strengthened us, to the point that we have submitted application for a major grant, a UKRI one, with three more colleagues on decolonizing urban health. So what it's about moving beyond and thinking about well-being. And in this case, 3 case studies, Medellin, Calcutta, and Athens. And in Athens, we'll be actually working with communities of African heritage. And also following this methodological toolkit. Again, we're using and continue using co-labor and the idea of using participatory arts-based methods based on decoloniality or decolonial practices, feminist care theory, reciprocity, and community-driven approaches.
And on the community side, there's going to be a second festival, is that right? But this time you've got a couple of new partners.
We are now co-organizing a festival, as mentioned, with Umame Africa, a group of street artists, and Kai Collaboration, which is a collaboration between African and Greek, probably Albanian musicians, which is an urban lab of music, to co-create this festival. And what is also quite important is that this time the festival will happen in a public space. It's also about thinking what it is to claim back public space for real visibility of these communities.
Great, thank you. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the ways that you tried to help overcome some of the barriers that would otherwise have stood in the way from this kind of event happening.
Okay, one answer to this is in relation to how to fund or finance such an event or of that sort of length. Even if it is small or bigger, definitely you need to, there will be costs of various different levels. So in the previous one, what we did was that these 2 funding we received were used in a way to facilitate the organization, the co-organization of the festival. When we put down the funding, obviously, as you may be also quite aware, there are certain, strategies, and there is a kind of, not even barriers, certain criteria that you've been asked by the funder when you get to the funding proposal. So obviously the funder, we didn't put down that we need, let's say, money to cover a microphone or this and that, or the post-production material. But when we came with our community, our collaborators, in this case, ANASA, in a very transparent manner, we said, okay, these are the money we received by the 2 funders. How best can we use this funding for organizing this festival. We are lean on your own expertise and knowledge on how to organize a music event or a series of art-based events, from interactive children's workshops to music concerts. So this was the way we worked with the funding in that sense. So on the one hand, we brought the funding and was given to the community itself. So this is also called transvestment, so moving the money.
So you act almost as a broker in a way to negotiate the funding from the funding body and, of course, report back to the funder in a transparent way, but with the understanding that the expertise and exactly how best to spend the money is going to come from your partners.
Yes, definitely. The other thing which is important to say, and that's why we wanted to be very clear on that, and the reasons why we didn't want to include private funding art organizations, was to ensure that everybody in the project will be equally paid. So all the musicians, everybody who worked in the various different stages of the project got some kind of sort of honorarium, because it was not a salary, it was a very small funding we got. But honestly, within this very small minimal amount, we managed to cover everything.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for taking us through the project, both from a methodological perspective, with key capacity and community building elements, through to the practicalities of organising such an ambitious festival, no less than twice. I should add that there's a documentary being made about the research project and about the festival, details of which you can find in the show notes. It just remains for me to thank our guest this week, Dr. Penny Travlou, and of course you, our listeners.